Hey friends, I'm just going to do a real quick recap of the City Council meeting on Monday, December 8th. I'm going to start doing these little video recaps of longer meetings and things that are difficult to digest. The city manager's agenda had a lot of reports back on Monday, and the number of policy orders was kind of average. Here's four reports back that stuck out. One was a report back on convening the city within 72 hours of any emergency. And I think the report back was mostly, hey, there's certain times when we want to do that, and then there's other times where it's not productive or 72 hours isn't the right amount of time. The police commissioner, head of human services, many other departments report back to the city manager, and people reflect as a team on what the right type of response is. Brian Corr, Peace Commission, many other people are part of that process, and the city manager was just saying, hey, it might not actually be 72 hours. The Grand Junction Pathway report came back, and the report is basically, hey, this is a long process. This is a state-driven process, and that part is going to kick off in January and probably take a year, and we can be working in tandem with that process. Brian Murphy may actually sit on the Citizen Advisory Council. Our Director of Community Development may actually be part of the advisory process for the state side, which will give a unique and interesting point of connection between the state process and the city process for making that wonderful pedestrian kind of small transit train and bike path. And to get all those things into the same path is obviously tough and a big planning exercise, and it's something that a number of our residents, including the Friends of the Grand Junction Path, will be interested in, and there were promises that they'd be drawn into that state process so that even though it is a year, it will be a fruitful and productive one. There was a water usage report back about, how can we stem water leaks and water usage bills and notify people if there is a leak. Step one was basically how can we run the algorithm and find out where the leaks are more often, and the city agreed to that when I brought it up. And how can we be calling and texting people when we don't always have their information. I was surprised to hear we don't always have people's information. But that's the way it is, and apparently they're going to start collecting that more rapidly now so they can make those contacts when people are getting billed for leaks. The community garden at Whittemore Ave is likely to go forward, and that's in cooperation with the developer there. For the first time, we're seeing cooperation and a potential easement to get that garden back up and running, and that's thanks to a few very specific citizens who have taken ownership and driven that forward and made sure it was a reality. So that is really good news. We did approve a curb cut associated with that property contingent on kind of getting that garden back and the easement and the money the city will pay for that easement to be negotiated. I don't think we've lost leverage in the negotiation simply because there's other problems the city can create for this developer if he doesn't come through on his agreement. In terms of policy orders, really briefly, Councillor Chung put in a Global Divestment Day order to talk about divestment. I suggested we have a broader conversation about how the city's invested, how our universities are invested. As is often the case, I think there's a lot of claims for local universities and amongst student groups that the investments are not just ones, and that in many cases there are very specific human rights abuses that corporations have often admitted to and have not addressed. So in those cases, it's very clear that our corporations and our university corporations and our city needs to divest, and that will go to the university committee, which is chaired by Vice Mayor Mazen, and then we'll see what we can muster from there. But I'm hoping for a collaborative effort amongst the city councilors to put pressure on our universities and, of course, on our own city investments. The community benefits plan order and the C2 plan order came up, and I said, great. These are things that I called for when we had a joint meeting with the planning board, and I said, who's leading here? And some of the councilors, I think, took that and said, well, I want to submit an order and I want to lead this process. But what I had said at this meeting was, we need community development to give us a timeline, to show us all the things that are on the table, the things that get bumped when we put in new planning policy orders, the things that are on track, the things that are behind. I don't care if a timeline gets bumped a little bit or if more things get put on the table so everything takes longer. My point was that I need to know what is on the table, what's come off the table, where we are in various processes, and through that timelining and goal setting, all of us as councillors can then exercise leadership at a time that's convenient for the city and responsive to the citizens. If we're just putting in policy orders willy-nilly, it's not going to work. So while I'm very thankful for these policy orders, I think the city is kind of saying, hey, you got the timing wrong on a couple of things. We're still working on those and we're going to get those back, and the policy order doesn't necessarily accelerate those things, but it should. It should accelerate those things. We should have insight into those processes, and to that end, I think I'm working with the city manager in January, starting in January, and I'm sure a lot of other city councilors will be working with the city manager to advance a clear timelining and goal-setting process. Last two, there was a really interesting debate on the Olympic bid, and Vice Mayor Mazen was leading a discussion saying, hey, the bid is already out, it's too late for a discussion on whether we support the bid, but it's not too late to begin engaging the group supporting the bid in a talk about community. And almost everyone else, I think, kind of said, hey, this is an economic disaster. There's a lot of waste and corruption that comes with the Olympic bid. Yes, we want transit infrastructure. Yes, we want changes to our city. Yes, we want state and federal input. We need to get those things without hosting an Olympics. We need to get those things without some of the inequity and some of the poor planning that traditionally happens around Olympics in major world cities. So that vote to oppose the Olympic bid passed, and in fact it passed with a substitution from Councillor Toomey that made it even stronger. Not that we would oppose the Olympic bid unless they came and talked with residents, but in fact that we would oppose the Olympic bid flat out, given the fact that they have ignored that and that they are so far along without our input. Not just our input, but entirely without the input of neighborhood groups in the city in general. That passed 6 to 2 to 1, meaning that 6 were in favor. I was in favor of opposing. 2 were against opposing. McGovern and Mayor Marr, I think, were in favor of supporting the Olympics and against opposing it. And Vice Mayor Mazen was present, not voting one way or the other. And then lastly, Councillor Chung had an important council order on capacity at CDD. If indeed we're not having timelines, not having goals, not even having the amount of community outreach that we want, and yet if CDD is known to be working super hard on a lot of important research, outreach, and planning issues, that must be a capacity issue. And that's something I think the city has said on and off. That's something that Councillor Chung clearly brought up this time, and that's something that I've brought up at various points along the year with the city manager and in open session in council. I don't know what we're going to hear back on this request for a report on this policy order, but I'm pretty sure it's going to make it into a budget discussion, and I'm really gung-ho this time, as I was last time, in the budget discussion to increase capacity there. At that time they weren't ready to do so, but they wanted to, and now as we approach another budget session in the next several months, I think it's really going to be front and center as we discuss the community development budget, their ability to do community outreach, plan, and be proactive about timelining and goal setting. So that is the City Council meeting for Monday, December 8th. It's a brief recap, believe it or not, of what was about a 3-hour or so meeting. And there were many other issues addressed, but these were the ones that popped out for me.